Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. This is now some difficult MCQs for your exam on the 10th of June for 5090 O-level biology syllabus. The first difficult question is question 5. An investigation was carried into the effects of light intensity and carbon dioxide concentration on the rate of photosynthesis. Which graph shows the results of this investigation? So you can see here we've got light intensity here, we've got light intensity here. Here we've got light intensity, and here we have changed so it's light intensity is on that side and rate of photosynthesis on this side. Now, if you look at the graph, how does the graph change? You see, if you have light intensity on this axis and you have rate of photosynthesis on this axis, well, the rate increases and then it levels out, because light then no longer becomes the limiting factor. From A to B, light is the limiting factor. From B to C, light is no longer limiting. So the rate of photosynthesis will increase from A to B, but then it will level out from B to C because there are no more chloroplasts to absorb light. But then in this question they gave you three things. They gave you high CO2 concentration, intermediate, and low CO2 concentration. So this should have been the line which should have been at the base of it. So this one is you see, in all these you can see this should have been the first line, and then the second, and then the third. And in this situation we have this story 1 2 3. In this situation we have a slightly yes, we have the same sort of story, but it's a little different with 3. But here we've got it now slightly wrong. This is now 1 2 and 3, and here of course we have this is the 1, this is the 2 and the 3, but of course here the axis has been labeled differently. It's rate of photosynthesis and light. So what we have to understand is that the rate of photosynthesis the one with the high carbon dioxide concentration must have a greater rate than the intermediate, and the intermediate should be more than the low carbon dioxide. So this is how you have to figure this out, and that is why the answer was A. But why is the answer not B? In the answer not B is, of course, the sequence is wrong. In the low carbon dioxide concentration, you can see it is a low carbon dioxide which is giving you the highest rate of photosynthesis. So this is wrong. Then in the rate of photosynthesis and light intensity, the rate is increasing. That is not the situation. The rate increases and then levels out. So you've got to understand is, for light intensity as increases, the rate increases and then levels out. Here the rate is decreasing. So this is wrong. D was, of course, they had changed the axis. The rate of photosynthesis is always on the light intensity, which is the independent variable, is on the x-axis, and the rate of photosynthesis, which is the dependent variable, is on the y-axis. So this was wrong. Then coming on to question number 8, which statement about diets is correct? A diet providing all the needs of an average man aged 70 can lead to malnutrition in an active boy aged 14. Malnutrition can only occur if the body receives less of a nutrient than it requires. Now, why is this wrong? Of course, the answer is A, but why is B wrong? The reason B is wrong is that if you eat too much fat, then it results in obesity. So if you are having a lot of fat, that results in obesity. Now, that is not less of here it says malnutrition. Malnutrition means overnutrition or undernutrition. So malnutrition can only occur if the body receives less of a nutrient. But of course, malnutrition is also if you eat more fat, then you're going to end up being obese. So that is also malnutrition. So please remember, malnutrition is just not undernutrition, it's also overnutrition. Then this was wrong because of this reason. Protein requirements in the diet increase throughout a person's life. No, they don't increase. They change, of course, with time. For instance, if you're suffering from a disease, you need a little more protein. If you're growing, you need protein. But if you have some chronic disease, then you need proteins, but it doesn't increase throughout a person's life. Then very young children require a greater total energy intake than active adults. Well, it depends upon how young the child is, and of course this is not very correct, because energy intake is dependent on, number one, your height, your weight, and your age, and your gender, and your occupation. What is your activity? Are you just a computer person, or are you a laborer who does a lot of manual work? So that is dependent on that. So that is why this is wrong. So please understand, when they say which statements about diet is correct, you've got to look at the correct one and then you have to explain to yourself why these others are wrong. So if you have justified yourself that the others are wrong because of this reason, then of course you tick the correct answer. Then coming to another difficult question, what is not? You see, whenever you see this, you must sort of underline it, because you can do this, you can write on the paper. What is not an example of assimilation? So it means all the others are an example of assimilation except one which is not an example of it. So synthesis of glycogen from glucose, synthesis of fats from fatty acids and glycerol, synthesis of glucose from starch, and synthesis of protein from amino acid. Well, first let's revise assimilation. What is assimilation? Is the transport and utilization of absorbed foods in the liver. So, and what is absorbed is you usually just have carbohydrates, fats and proteins, which are the macromolecules which you consume either in the roti or the biryani or the rice or the bread that you eat. So glucose. Then if you've had meat or if you've had dal, then amino acids, if you had butter or ghee, or maybe you've had a cheesecake or slice of cheesecake, well, that's fats, a lot of fats in that. So all these are types of the absorbed food products. Then what happens to them as they go to the liver? The amino acids, the glucose is stored as glycogen, the amino acids will be used synthesis of plasma proteins and enzymes, and synthesis of many other protein molecules in the cells. Then the fats will be used to make the plasma membrane, which is the cell membrane, which is a phospholipid bilayer. And of course the urea deamination, and that of course will be removed by the kidneys. The glucose will be respired, so there will be cellular respiration. So please pause the video here and have a look at this, and then understand how all these will be absorbed and then will enter. So the hepatic portal vein will only have glucose and amino acids. The lipids will go through the lacteals and then finally enter the circulation again in the subclavian vein. So what is not an example of this is an example, this is an example, this is an example, this is not an example. Glucose cannot be made from starch. That is not possible from starch. If you eat bread or rice that contains starch, but that is digested to glucose, and the glucose enters the blood and then it's carried all around the body, and then your cells use it for respiration, or if it's in excess, then it will be stored as glycogen in the liver. Then coming to question number 11, which features of a root hair cell helps to take up ions from water in the soil? Well, you've got to remember that ions are taken up by active transport. That's actually a part of the syllabus which you have to understand. And if you don't go through the syllabus, you don't remember these points. So it's active transport. So if you look at the question, the cell has a partially permeable cell wall. That's fine. The cell has a partially permeable cell wall. It's not partially permeable, it's fully permeable. The root hair cell wall is fully permeable. The cell is able to provide a source of energy. Why do we need energy? We need energy for active transport. So that is why the answer to this was B. But then of course what I want to see, why is C wrong? The cell wall vacuole has a high ion concentration. That doesn't help in anything. If it has a high ion concentration, well then that means ions will have to be taken in against the concentration gradient. But it didn't say that. It said which feature of a root hair cell helps to take up ions from the water in the soil. The cell vacuole has a lower water potential, has a low water potential. Well, that's only going to help water to move in, not ions to move in. So you must understand why is B the correct answer and why is A, C and D the wrong answer. Question 15, another difficult question. The diagram represents the blood supply to the liver and to the kidneys. Which vessel contains blood with the highest and lowest concentration of urea? So highest and lowest concentration of urea. You have to remember is that urea is made here in the liver. Why is it made here in the liver? It's made by deamination. So when the blood is going to flow out of it, this is the place where urea is going to be in a high concentration. So high would be because liver makes urea, deamination occurs in the urea. Here the blood is flowing into it and is flowing out of it. So naturally if you throw something in the river, it's going to carry with the flow of the river. So it's going to be high in which is of course the name would be the hepatic vein. So it will be high in 1, right? So we have these two options available. Now what are the other options of the lowest? You remember a kidney. So renal artery enters, and this is of course, and the renal vein goes out, and the renal vein will of course have less urea. Why will it have less urea? Because all the urea has been filtered out of the blood and is going to be passed in. So renal vein, this is the renal vein, this is the renal artery. So the renal artery will have more, but the renal vein will have less. Now here comes a little catch in it. It says which one would have the lowest. Now in the kidneys you see this is the renal artery. and the one taking the blood out of it, this is the renal vein. So what we have to understand is that why is the answer B? The answer B is because the renal vein would have less urea in it, because it's all been filtered out, but there's always a little bit of the urea which remains, and of course it will come again because the blood keeps on circulating in your body. So it's going to come back again, and then it's going to be filtered out, and so the renal vein is got less urea, because as the blood filters out here in the cortex, the urea is removed. That's where we have the glomerulus, where the urea is removed from the blood. Urea is removed from the blood. Please remember it. Not urea is removed from the body. Urea is removed from the blood. Now coming to question number 19, which is another very difficult question. The diagram shows structures in a human which form and store urine. Liquids pass through the tubes X, Y, and Z in the direction shown by the arrows. Now I've labeled all this for you. X is the renal artery, Y is the renal vein, kidney, ureter is Z, and then the urethra. Of course, but they only want you to talk about, I've just labeled it for you to revise it. Which statement about the volume of liquid passing through Y? Now Y is the renal vein. So the liquid Y in one day is correct. Now what we've got to understand is, say 100 ml is passing in X. Y would have 80 ml. Why would it have 80 ml? Because Z would have 20 ml. I'm just giving you these figures. I don't mean this is exactly correct, but I'm just giving you figures to make you understand, because Y is 180. Why? Because renal artery would have more volume of liquid, because some of it is going to be passed out, is going to be the urea plus some water and excess salts are going to be passed out as urine, which is going to be passed in Z. So which statement about the volume of liquid passing through Y in one day is correct? If you remember these figures, then you can get all this very right, and you can understand that Y is Y. It says it is Y, because they are asking you liquid pass. So Y is less than X, but much greater than that passing through Z. So if you can now read all the questions, you can understand why the answer to this was D was correct. But why is A wrong? That means Y is more than X. No, Y is 80, X is 100. Then Y is less than Z. No, Y is 80, Z is 20. Then Y is less. You see here, it is. Instead of it is, you should say Y. Y is less than X, but greater than that passing is less than, but slightly greater. Slightly greater, no, that's wrong. It's not slightly greater. It's quite a lot. Y is less than X. Y is less than X, that's right. But slightly greater than passing through Z. No, Z is very little. I mean, how many times do you go to the bathroom? We don't pass out so much of urine every day. So this is why C was wrong. So Y is slightly less than X, yes, that's correct, but much greater than that passing through Z. So if you remember these figures, then you can understand what I'm trying to tell you is that this is just some figures which I've given you, is just to make you understand that renal vein will have less blood in it, but not a lot less, because only some of it is going to be filtered out and is going to be converted to urine. Now, coming to question number 20, the diagram shows the homeostatic control of body temperature. Above normal temperature, body temperature increases, normal body temperature decreases below normal temperature, and then R, and then there's a coordinator, and then corrective mechanism, negative feedback, normal temperature, negative feedback, and corrective mechanism. So above normal temperature and corrective mechanisms P and Q, and then of course there's a coordinator R. Now this is actually a syllabus point which they are asking you. Now it says what are the corrective mechanisms P and Q and coordinator R. Now coordinator R had to be the brain, it couldn't be anything else. There is only one main coordinator, which is the brain, which controls everything. Now in A and B they've given you sweating, and in C and D they've given you shivering. Now we've got to understand is why shivering would be wrong. Shivering would somewhere come here if it was below the normal temperature. Then we could have thought of shivering here. Because if you sort of fall into ice cold water and you went ice skating and you fell into the water, well, that is what is going to happen. You're going to start shivering. But if your temperature has gone above normal, you enter this room is very hot. Now what is going to be happening? There are going to be two mechanisms which are going to be happening. Number one is vasodilation and sweating. And now there's a very big concept which I feel is not clear to most of you, is what is vasodilation. Now what is vasodilation? Vasodilation is increase in the volume flowing in the skin arteries and the skin arterioles. And where you get it wrong is you think it's the skin capillaries. No, it's not the skin capillaries. The skin capillaries cannot do anything. This is an artery, and then it divides into arterioles. And then there are the capillaries. So capillaries are only a 1 cell thick. They can't change their diameter. It's only the arteries and the arterioles which have a muscle in their wall. And this muscle in the wall either relaxes or contracts and changes the volume of the blood vessels. So it's only the arteries and the arterioles which can vasodilate. Of course, this is not in the question, but I want to explain this to you because they can ask you a question like that in the MCQ. So what we have to understand is that it would be sweating, it would be more blood flowing close to the skin surface. Why more blood now? Of course, it's not that the vessels can move, but what is going to happen is that the answer is A, of course. What is going to happen is that because the skin arteries carry more volume of blood, so more in the capillaries, so more heat lost by radiation. So this is what you have to understand in this question, that if they ask you another MCQ on this, you must know what they're going to be asking you about. Question 23, the diagram shows three positions X, Y and Z where nerve impulses are blocked by a drug: brain, spinal cord, sensory neuron, motor neuron. Now, please look at the labeling very carefully. Sensory neuron. When a person listed below moves their leg in response to a pinprick but does not feel it, so he can move his leg, so that means the spinal reflex is taking place. Why? Because sensory neuron carries the impulses and then they come back from the spinal cord, and the motor neuron goes to the muscle. M motor, M muscle. So as he can move his leg, that means the muscle is contracting. But he does not feel it, so that means there is a block here somewhere. So that is why the answer was C, a person with a block at Z. You see, a person at a block with X, why would that be wrong? Why is this wrong? This is wrong because he is moving his leg. So the stimulus has moved there. A person with a block at Y, but then how has he moved his leg? The person moves his leg, so the motor neuron has reached the muscle has contracted. If the muscle contracts, that means then the information is going through the motor neuron. A person with no block, but why does he not feel it? So that means the brain has not been informed. Now, question 30, as it says in the exam report, the question was not well answered. That means you're all very confused about this. The diagram shows the movement of carbon in the carbon cycle in gigatons per year. Well, that doesn't matter whatever the units were, that is immaterial. But what is important is that you need to look at this carbon cycle. In the carbon cycle, we have three things which we have talked about: respiration, combustion, and decomposition. These are the three things that we talk about. But what we need to understand is that in decomposition also it is the microorganisms respiring and returning the carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. So here is the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Now let's look at the arrows which are going to it. So animals respire carbon dioxide going back to the atmosphere, 20. Plants respire carbon dioxide going back to the atmosphere, 40. What is this 125? This 125 is photosynthesis, because that is taking the carbon dioxide. Right? Then the decomposers also respiring and the carbon dioxide returning to the atmosphere. Here we have plants, fossil fuel is 0.1. That's not plants respiring. Then fossil fuels are burnt and the carbon dioxide returned to the atmosphere. That is combustion, which is the 10. So if you add the 60, the 40 and the 20, this comes to 120. So the answer is A. But you have to understand why are we not adding the 0.1 and the 10. The 0.1, of course, there's no answer 0.1, but the 10 is fossil fuels are burnt and the carbon dioxide is returned to the atmosphere. That's not respiration. Animals respire, return the CO2 to the atmosphere. Plants respire, so that's 40. Animals 20. And the decomposers, microorganisms, bacteria and fungi respire and return the carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. So 60, 40, 20 is 120. Now coming to question number 33, the diagram shows two onion plants. Using the information in the diagram, which statement about these onion plants is correct? Now you can see one onion plant is growing on its own and then they've labeled flower. So flower is a sexual reproduction, anther, filament, stigma, style, ovary, ovule. So that will produce seeds and the seeds will then be transferred and will reproduce sexually. But in this situation, what they've shown you is a daughter plant and sort of a stem coming out of it and then a daughter plant. So these and these are genetically identical, and the stalk and a small bulb, and they've shown you this. So using the information in the diagram, which statement about these onion plants is correct? Daughter plants are produced from the small bulb by meiosis. Now can we see meiosis? We can't see any meiosis here. Meiosis only takes place in the anthers and in the ovule. Then daughter plants are produced from the flower, are genetically identical to from the flower. Now flower of course is going to result in seeds, and seeds are not genetically identical. That's a variation. Like you study red flowers crossed with white flowers, and all the seeds that we planted are going to give us pink flowers, and that's the variation which results because of meiosis. Then see, the plants can reproduce sexually and asexually. Yes, because they have flowers, so that means it's sexual reproduction, and because then there is this daughter plant story. So the answer of course is C, but I'm telling you why the other answers are incorrect. Two parent plants are required for reproduction. Now in this situation yes, but in this situation no, we don't need two parent plants for reproduction because this is asexual reproduction. So that is why the answer to 33 was C. Now question 38 is a genetics question, and I like these genetic questions because they really check how well you know your subject. Earlobes can either be attached to the cheek or be free. The characteristic is controlled by a single gene. The allele for attached earlobe is recessive. This is the most important thing which I tell you always to look at. So that means that small a, so people who are attached. Now who are the people who are attached? Let's look at the people who are attached. These are all small a, so just write it on the paper. Small a, small a, small a, small a, and small a, small a. Now the other ones which are males or females with, so these can be either big A, or they can be big A, small a. So these are the dominant traits. So these people can be big A or big A, small a. Now which two individuals must be heterozygous for earlobe attachment? Now if you have written it like this, like the way I have done it, then you can all figure it out. You have to understand 7 has to be big A, small a. Why? Because there's one small a coming here and one small a coming here. That's why you've got these small a, small a. Right? So 7 has to be big A, small a, cannot be big A, big A. Then as offspring 6 is small a, small a. So the parents both have to be big A, small a. Because if the parents are big A, small a, then only they can have a child this. But if both the parents are this, then you can't have this child. So this person, the parents have to be heterozygous to have a homozygous recessive child. So now the options that you have are 1 and 7, 3 and 4, 5 and 8, 6 and 9. Now of course the answer is 1 and 7, which A is correct, but why is 3 and 4 wrong? You see, anyone having 6 and 9 would be wrong because 6 and 9 are recessive. So this is wrong because 6 and 9 are recessive. Why is 5 and 8 wrong? 5 is not heterozygous. We don't know if it's heterozygous. Could be heterozygous. We're not sure, but could be this as well. And 8 we don't know, it's a dominant trait. We really can't tell. We have no way to tell whether it's this or it's this. Then 3 and 4 we can't tell. We don't have any way of telling because it can be anything. And 4 of course we can't tell either. So you've got to understand is how did we figure this out? How do we figure this out? That is the important thing that you need to understand, is that first you write down the people with the recessive characteristics. That can only be one genotype, small a, small a. Then the last question, which feature of a cereal crop cannot be improved by selective breeding alone? You see, selective breeding is artificial selection in which we do it for human benefit. So people must benefit from it, only then we do. So which features of a cereal crop cannot be improved by selective? Resistance to drought, yes, we can do that. It's going to increase crop yield. Tolerance to low temperature, increase crop yield. Number of seeds produced will, of course, if we can increase this, then we can have human benefit. But it says which cannot be improved. Now, the ability to fix nitrogen, first of all, cereal crops cannot fix nitrogen. It's leguminous plants that can fix nitrogen. And if you make them fix nitrogen, how can you do that? You can't put the genes for this whole thing into cereal crops. So whenever you're doing a question on artificial selection or selective breeding, please always think the points which are for human benefit, that is the point which is for selective breeding. So that is why the answer was A, because all these would of course help us to increase crop yield, and that is a human benefit that you are looking at. Only paper 1-1 has been discussed in this video, and I will try to make another video and get the 1-2 so that you all can get some help just before the exam. And thank you very much for watching. Thank you for subscribing.